Well, good evening, all. So, oops. Hopefully, this will work. I am actually broadcasting from home today. You just mixed the electric company coming and trying to do stuff, and I'm on my back porch because y'all don't want to see the house. It's trashed, and so I'm doing this without internet, so I'm just using a hotspot. So hopefully my connection is decent, and we'll see how long the mosquitoes allow us to stay out here. If you're wondering why I'm on fire here, you'll find out. You'll have to stay and hang out for the rest of it. So if you're just showing up, we're going to get started right at 6 o'clock, although because I totally forgot I was doing this tonight, we'll see who all shows up because I didn't spam the entire planet beforehand. So we shall see. I may make it a short night if we don't get anybody on board here. But remember, if you miss everything or anything, you can always log on Tradition School of Herbal Studies YouTube page, and I have the last few years of stuff archived there. So, all right, it looks like folks are showing up. Outstanding. So I'm going to try to keep my flames going. Hey, Sabrina, yay, somebody showed up. I don't have to talk to myself all night. So we'll see whether this works out. Hotspots are notoriously iffy, and I'm still working from home without internet, so yay, there's more folks. So if you're just joining us, I promise I'll explain why I'm lighting the computer on fire here. And if you got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're from, and all that good stuff. And we'll get started probably at 6 o'clock, presumably. Let's see if I can get another piece going. This is my plan for keeping the mosquitoes away from me, because although I am in a outside screened porch, it's really not that screened. So we shall see whether usually this does a pretty good job of keeping the mosquitoes away, but the smoke will end here shortly, so we'll see how good a job it does. So I see folks showing up. All right, we got another, probably help if I had my glasses on. Got about another minute. We'll get started here, and we'll see how long I can survive all the mosquitoes. Yeah, I was afraid of that. No, it's probably me. I'm just doing a hot spot out here. I must admit, I totally forgot what day it was. Ooh, that's hot. And normally I would have gone to the school to do this, or I would have had my own internet. And so I didn't have time to run to the school before I got set up. So I'm just hot spotting it tonight. All right, it's 6 o'clock, and I'm Bob Linde, and I'm really not on fire, even though it might look like it. I'm Bob Linde from Tradition School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies, and this is our Herbal Open Forum. I've been doing this once a month, the last Friday of every month, for a really long time. So I started this during COVID because I kind of missed doing all my in-person classes and such. But because we had, I had really a good time connecting with people who had graduated, moved away, or just people who, you know, I'd never really met in all over the world, literally. And it was an opportunity to start answering questions for folks. I get emails and so forth all the time, and I don't always have time to answer all of those. You know, too many irons in the fire. Speaking of which, so if you're interested in the school, we teach both the Western and Chinese herbal program. Promise the commercial short. And it's from beginner all the way to clinician, which includes at least a year of clinical practice as part of that. And there's also the acupuncture the acupuncture and herbal therapies clinical practice. You can find out more about the clinic at acuherbals.com. That's ACUHERBALS. And we've got a number of herbalists and acupuncturists there, as well as an intern clinic associated with both the local acupuncture school, Dragon Rises, as well as my own herb students, all getting practice at a reduced rate, supervised by me or one of the other senior practitioners. And if you want to find out more about our classes, and I will say there's some really cool classes coming up, probably going to be too late for most folks, but one of my, I won't call it my favorite, but it's like one that I'm more excited about than most, is the business of herbalism. That's this weekend. It is open to the general public, and going through things that are just good business. It's not unique to herbalism, but certainly a lot of the questions will be answered and will be focused on herbalism, how to create a business, how to go through the thought process, marketing, the legal structures, all that really interesting stuff that most herbalists run away from because, we usually, business isn't our strongest point. So that's coming up this weekend. It's a 2-day intensive. And then next week, in November 1st, is alcohol-free herbalism, which I think is a really important topic. I'm not teaching that. I'm actually not sure who is. On Thursday, November 7th, nutrition and mental health, another one that's super important. It's one of the primary ways to address both chronic and acute mental health issues. On November 8th is herbal sleep support. That's a make and take kind of class. And this is really important. There's still a few slots left in the Chinese herbal program. I'm going to put this out. Actually, I'm just going to let it smoke me here from now. Is next Saturday, not tomorrow, but a week from Saturday, November 9th, is the start of the Chinese herbal program. And you do have to make it to the first 3 classes in order to continue with the program. Admittedly, it is recorded, so even if you're like, oh my God, I missed Saturday, I didn't know, you can still jump in the program. But for those of you who really want to focus on clinical practice or plan on going to acupuncture school, I think the Chinese herbal program is phenomenal in getting you through both the basic understanding of traditional Chinese medicine and also the diagnostic tools necessary for it. And I really had a number of people who've been so successful, and if the idea of energetics has kind of baffled you and Western herbal medicine and so forth, this really fills in a lot of the gaps and makes it a little bit easier. So there's still time to sign up for that. I think we've got like 5 slots left, which is about normal. And of course, our ongoing anatomy and anatomy physiology for the herbalist is coming up on November 14th. And then we're going to have a class. It'll be a morning class on a Friday. It'll be a little bit different. It's going to be outside, so weather permitting, dress for the weather, is growing herbs in Florida, medicinal herbs in Florida. And if you haven't already tried, it is unique growing herbs here in Florida. And promise, I'll explain what this little torch is that's going away. I'm going to put this at my feet to keep my mosquitoes away. Hopefully that will keep burning and smoking here for a little while. Growing herbs, November 15th. And then there's been a series of 3 classes. I taught the first one. Tricia just taught one yesterday on blood work. And so trying to understand blood work, how do we talk to our doctors about it? What does it mean? And what the heck do we do with that information? And the last of that series, Martina is teaching. I'm actually kind of excited for it. And that's next Thursday. And if you're like, oh my God, I had no idea, you can sign up for all of those classes are recorded. So you can still sign up for the whole series and get all of those. We're going to try to make sure that that stays available because we get so many questions from students, from patients and so forth, trying to wrap their head around the concepts of blood work because it is, let's just say, frustrating because doctors say we're great and then we see all these things out of range, and those are important. And then one that's not going to be taught at the school, actually, 'tis the season, so I have scheduled a few herb walks. I'm going to be up at Sweetwater Farms a couple times before the holidays. But I'm doing a really interesting one down in Sarasota at Ringling. And it's really nice. They reached out to me, and they've got an ongoing series for the whole week, I believe, that is very inexpensive, still tickets available, but it's a whole focus on environmentalism. And so they're trying really hard to bring about the concept of environmentalism without putting politics into it, without an agenda and also making it fun. So they have a number of artists that are performing a couple of interesting things that are representative of the environment. And I'm going to do kind of a talk and a walk combination on November 14th, actually, the morning of November 14th. So if you got an early riser or you want to try to get that day off from work, it should be a really nice turnout. And I'm excited. I know on their grounds they got some unique plants. I hate to say it, we'll see how they've done through the storm, but I did see that they were opening. They were open for business and operation. Maybe their landscaping will get a little out of control and make my herb walk an easier time. A lot of times for the very manicured, and that is definitely the manicured lawn, it gets a little bit more challenging. I may have to go down there in the next week and see what they actually have going on there. So one of the goals, and I'll stop pitching everything here. So one of the goals of this open forum is always to educate as much as we can. And I see we got a couple of people jumping on. So needless to say, if you got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I will add them to the mix. But I'm going to try to start creating a topic. In a perfect world, I'll actually advertise it ahead of time to focus it in, but I'm not afraid to go off on wild tangents. But because of all the hurricane craziness, we just had the Duke Energy was out here replacing some of the power lines that were, I won't say hanging down in the yard, but close enough. And talking about kind of acute care and traumatology, and probably I'll end up talking more about it from a spiritual emotional kind of a concept as well. And I'll do a little Western, a little Chinese, talk about the things that you can do and so forth. But of course, I got to talk about this smoking stick that I've got here. So I'm always surprised, people who I think are woodsy people who've camped a lot and things like that. Turns out that not a lot of people know about lighter's pine, and this is going to be a horrible example. But this is a big chunk of lighter's pine that I picked up a while back. And normally you would make shavings off of this. You would make little matchsticks and it would light very easily, and it's basically a bunch of pine resin that's solidified into it, and it's just a unique thing that I only know about from Florida. I find it all the time when I'm walking around in the woods, and it's this very dense, heavy, resinous, and so this has been laying on the ground forever, and it's literally, it's like it's petrified. And so all it is the congealed resins from this. This should be in your first aid. If you're like, I'm going out camping and canoeing and doing all that kind of stuff, a few sticks of this, nothing this large, this is silly, is really good to have in your first aid kit, because especially in canoeing, you flip your canoe, all your stuff's soaking wet, and I know it's hard to believe that in Florida that you can get hypothermia, but you can definitely get hypothermia, especially if you get wet here in Florida. And there's nothing more challenging that when you're freaked out, maybe injured, it might be raining, you're freezing to death, and now you're going to try to light a fire to rescue yourself with this. This is something you can literally submerge in water for a week, shake the water off, and light with 1 or 2 matches. If you make a pile of shavings, it literally will burn for a few minutes, allowing you to really get your wood going. The other thing that it's good for, and it's kind of what I'm doing here, I'm sitting in my back porch is, let's just say the screens are less than complete, not just from the storm, just from neglect on my part. And so for some reason my fan seems to have crapped out here, which usually helps to keep out the mosquitoes. And so I'm like, oh, I'm going to have some mosquitoes eating me out here, so we'll see how long I survive. But the smoke that's coming off of this is an excellent mosquito repellent. And so using pine sap in general, and keeping this down by my feet because that's where they really like to go, hopefully I'll be able to survive out here and not lose too much blood. Thank you, Bar. I already got some questions. Let me grab that one. I'm sitting here babbling away. Lemon balm and SSRIs. SSRIs and agrimony. Ooh. And autoimmune. Okay. Yeah, you got good questions. Sure, make me actually think here. Um, so if you're just joining us, please do post your questions on here. And if for some reason my computer craps out or gets too irritating, or just put your question in and you got to run away, I'll post this on the school's YouTube page afterwards, with whatever it is. So, I know people got to go to work or go out for dinner or whatever. So, Traditions School of Herbal Studies on YouTube, and you'll see all of our past recordings. And I usually get this up within a few days. So I'm sure I'll have it up there by Monday at the latest, but probably by tomorrow night, because I got to teach all that cool business stuff tomorrow. Let me do a quick check-in, just because most of the... I did not. Tammy, I missed those. Can you post those in here? Because I don't want to stop and go searching around for them, and I wasn't at the school, so maybe Trisha got it and didn't get it to me in time. I did want to do a check-in. In case you didn't know it, we had a couple of fun hurricanes that bebopped here into... what's up, Josh? Into Florida. And, this isn't a shock. We live in Florida. This is a normal area to get hurricanes into. It's been a while, though, although lots of hurricanes have threatened into the Tampa Bay area. This is probably the closest. Yes, Tammy, you may have missed it. I'm on a hotspot because I don't have internet yet and I can't make it there. So, yep, it's going to be on my end if it's a little spotty today. So, hang in there. Usually lets me keep going. It won't kick me off. If it does, give me about 2 minutes, and if I'm not back on, that means I gave up. The area was hit pretty hard, even though we didn't get a direct hit. Sarasota, Bradenton got really the direct hit. Helene was the first one, and honestly was not a huge concern for us here in Tampa Bay. It was about 150, 200 miles offshore, and we did get storm surge warnings, which is a normal thing. Big, strong storms like that paralleling the coast throws a lot of water up. And so what happened was areas that have never flooded before literally got storm surge, and I was one of those. I've been here for 14 years in my house, and I knew the owner and his son who lived just down the street before, and they were like, nah, we never flood. It's really nice. I've got a city park behind me that very few people use, and there's a little tidal creek which full of brackish water, so it does empty out into the bay about 100 yards from me. And that kind of separates me from the park, which is just lovely to have that creek back there. And really fascinating in that I went out there at 10:30 at night, and the storm came through at like midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I went out there. It's like, it's only a foot or so from the top. I've seen that 1,000 times before. And so I went to bed. I was like, it's not going to bother me. And I lost my power for 4 days, I think, from Helene. And I wake up in the morning. Of course, I wanted to go check to the school and the clinic and make sure that there was no damage there, because it was a little windy. And as I walk out into the driveway, I'm like, no, it smells funny out here. And I was like, my driveway is really slippery. And it turns out that although it didn't come into my house, it did come into my yard. And one of the sad things is, because it's brackish water, I'm going to write these down. Comments or experience with these formulas I found. Section external formula. Ooh, I may not have time to look up the actual thing, but hopefully I'll know this formula. Bing. Sorry, I'm going to keep my story going here in a second, but I want to write these down before, and then golden yellow, I know. And and oops, man, I need glasses so bad. Jin Huan San. All right. Sidang Gao. Gao, yes. Sidang Gao. All right. And so I was like, wow, that's crazy and a little scary, but no damage to the house, or like a little splashed onto the back porch, but nothing came into the house. And didn't think anything of it. And all my neighbors around me, unfortunately, some of them lost so many of their personal belongings and so forth. The curbside here is piled with furniture and mattresses and personal stuff. It's really quite a horrifying sight. And what I didn't think about was the fact that it is brackish water. And a lot of the plants that I grow here, and actually my neighbors all have really cool plants as well, many of them, because they're a little exotic, they're usually food or medicine, they're not all saltwater tolerant. And because we were all dealing with a million other things like power outages and so forth, most of us forgot about the fact that that was salt water that came into our yards. So let's just say I lost a lot of plants, and some did really well, some didn't. And I have not used this, but I've had a couple people who know better than I do that adding gypsum to the soil within about 24 hours afterwards and watering that in can neutralize, if you will, some of the negative benefits of getting that saltwater intrusion. Hopefully it doesn't happen too often, but in this day and age, it may be happening more often than we would like to talk about. And so then, of course, what was it, a week or two later, just as we got our power back on and so forth, and I cleaned all the gross stuff out of my refrigerator. Milton came and was drawing a straight line to Tampa Bay. Luckily, it went a little bit south of us, so we didn't get the flooding. I was not planning on evacuating because I was like, I never evacuate. I don't care if I'm at 10 feet. I'll be fine. And then I remembered the flood from Helene. I was like, oh, I don't have time to lose a truck. So I evacuated over to the school. It's like 15 minutes from here, and weathered it well, except we got a lot of wind and 18 inches of rain, which loosened the soil, and gusts of wind well over 100 miles an hour that uprooted, let's just say, a lot of trees. It really decimated. There was nothing left standing over 10 feet at the school. A lot of plants were uprooted, a lot of tree limb damage. But here at my house, I had pine trees that were 5-6 feet in diameter snapped in half or uprooted, and unfortunately one oak tree laying on my roof with a small hole in it. And nothing like a hole when it's torrential downpours, because then I ended up with an inch of water in my house. So no power for about 5 days, but still waiting on the internet, sadly, hence the crappy connection that we've got here at the moment. And one of the things that, I think, I started during Helene, when, everybody deals with loss in different ways. And whether that's loss of a loved one, a loss of a pet, a loss of our stuff, our home, it may be the home you grew up with, the loss of sentimental things, pictures, recordings. So many people in the area lost things that were important to them. And that can create shock, seeing the devastation, the piles of debris on the roadsides. Some people are definitely not prepared to handle power outages. We also had boil water notices. Many areas had no water at all. And all things that, luckily, between the military and growing up in the Bahamas, were an inconvenience. I much prefer having running water and electricity, but for me it's no big deal. I had plenty of canned goods and other things that I could cook over the grill, over a fire. It definitely makes life a little bit slower. The lack of internet and so forth is kind of a blessing sometimes. If it wasn't for the generators, it would be stunningly quiet, especially at night. But as part of any kind of large-scale disaster, and whether we're talking North Carolina, whether we're talking here, even Georgia got so much damage, and we've seen this year from Texas, Louisiana, and the season isn't over, so we probably have another month and a half, because we've definitely been getting tropical systems outside of our normal November 30th. So in every one of these cases, the general population needs support. They need emotional support. They need physical support. They need access to things. And all of those things really, people are losing sleep. They don't know what to do. They may have lost their pets. They lost, some people lost all of their belongings, like their houses blown away during Helene out on the beaches, literally unrecognizable. And so, as herbalists, so often we can provide support for that. And it's tough because if you're in the area that got challenged, that you're dealing with your own loss and grief and struggles and so forth. And so how do we provide support for folks? And there isn't a good answer for that. One thing that there's organizations like Herbalists Without Borders and Acupuncturists Without Borders, there's Naturopaths Without Borders, lots of similar organizations. Obviously, Doctors Without Borders, they're all modeled after that. I know I did the training with Acupuncturists Without Borders 10, 15 years ago, maybe longer than that. And it was really interesting stuff. But the biggest thing that we did was all of the acupuncturists that came to that class, we sat there and exchanged contact information, and the idea that if the East Coast gets challenged, they're not going to be in a position to do stuff. So the folks from the West Coast can go over and support them in the same way, the hope that the East Coast people would come over and support us and so forth. Luckily, this was not an Andrew or anything like that, although it was very challenging. At this point, the state's pretty good at recovery from these things. The fact that I had power in 5 days, although irritating, was miraculous. And so one of the things that I did with Helene and then continued it on for about a week and a half after Milton was doing community-style acupuncture. And a very different style of acupuncture. We're just doing it in chairs. We moved outdoors so that we could have our regular clinical time stuff going on as well. And a number of students came out, a number of graduates, both acupuncture and herb students, and we set up very specific times. So it wasn't like this 24-hour, everybody show up whenever you feel like it. But it was usually 2 and 3 hour pockets of time. And basically, I didn't have the time or resources to coordinate a variety of acupuncturists to give a longer window of care. So I was like, all right, I know I can dedicate this amount of time and resources to this to guarantee a basic support. And if we had other people who volunteered and so forth, then we could expand it. And I'm saying all of this because it's important to recognize that you can create a model like this even if you're dealing with your own struggles. You don't have to dedicate your entire life to doing this. This was like, all right, everybody's a little shell-shocked for a couple of weeks, and we could certainly do it longer. I'm sure people would show up. But for the short-term, immediate care, we were providing tea. We were providing community-style acupuncture, where we're just like arms, legs, and ears and head. And the herb students were providing ear seeds, auricular therapies, and magnets, so that people on acupressure points, and it would allow them to take that treatment with them. And this is, it's one of those things where even if it did absolutely no good, people felt supported and cared for. And so whether you're a massage therapist, whether you're an herbalist, one of the bright spots of any kind of a disaster, and it really doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a micro area, a house that burns down or something, or the macro in this case, was there were certainly people who were challenging, but the reality is I met both my neighbors in a better way. I was able to exchange phone numbers, and that's a sad statement. One was new, but the other one's been here for 5-10 years or something, and I was like, I kind of knew him, but never actually exchanged more than pleasantries, and so all right, now I actually know these guys a little bit better. But I saw people walking down the street with chainsaws helping to clear the road so people get out of their driveway, people helping with debris whenever they could, and I think there's some level of that still going on. So I think as herbalists, we sometimes feel overwhelmed. We feel like we have to keep going. But literally, you can say, I'm going to do 1 hour of free stress tea, and dedicate that. For my people that know how to do ear seeds, you could just do ear seeds. If you don't have a business, you could, whatever your favorite place is. I like to hang out at the kava bars. So you could literally go and talk to the manager or an owner at a kava bar, and it's like, hey, you guys want to cross promote this? Let's set up, Friday at 4 to 5 o'clock for your free ear seeds. It really is just that little bit. Even if only 2 people showed up, you're providing care for those 2 people, and those were the right people that you needed to see. So it is important that we take care of ourselves. The whole adage of put the oxygen mask on yourself first. But every little bit that any of us do adds up to a great deal. So, there's a lot of herbalists out there in our community. I've noticed, I think I've seen 3 other acupuncturists who've teamed up with other people to offer some form of community acupuncture. I saw one pair, they reached out to me to ask to borrow some forms that I had people sign before the acupuncture. And they were providing care out on the beaches, both to support a business that was out there, which was really a great idea, but also just to support the folks who are still out there trying to hang on out on the beaches. There's still people living out there. So it really is, it's like, even if you just do one little pebble into the pond, it makes a difference. And for some of us, it was not possible. I had one of my senior Western herb students, her husband has a small private plane, and so she gathered up a bunch of goods, and they flew it all up to North Carolina, to Asheville, and were just like dumped it out of the plane and took off. Hey, Ashley. Other people have done drives of everything from herbal medicine and so forth. So all of that, every little bit adds up. So and there's always one of y'all are smarter than me and think about things like, crap, there's no stores, they need tampons, or whatever it might be. Like, we think of as a dude, I think of basic needs of food and water and clothing, maybe shelter, maybe herbal medicine for a variety of issues, but I don't always think about feminine hygiene stuff. What do we, I don't have any kids, so I don't think of babies. Oh yeah, the screen door doesn't actually close. It's not the finest porch. It's on my list of things to fix. So I was burning, yes, oh, you may have missed it. I was burning my lighter's pipe. So I'm going to encourage you all, because obviously the headlines are dimming, but I still have a tree on my roof with a hole in my roof. So the people out on the beaches don't have electricity for many of them still. Obviously, North Carolina doesn't even have roads into some of the areas. So although it's not in the headlines, people are really in need probably for another 6 months and maybe longer. And so everybody who can dedicate an hour in some form or fashion, or support, or go through your hurricane supplies in another month and donate those somewhere. Things that we have a lot of organizations that have ongoing food pantries that folks are food challenged. Those have been depleted, because if we maybe had just a small percentage of people who were relying on those food pantries, all of a sudden a quarter of Tampa Bay was relying on those, and they're out of everything. And so, finding, come November 30th or whatever, December 1st, you're like, all right, I'm going to get rid of some of these crappy hurricane supplies that aren't good for me. That's the time to donate those things, and really support those people wherever you can. And I'll delve into that a little bit more, but I'm going to say, like, ooh, we got a decent crowd on here, yay. If you're just joining us, feel free to type in any questions you might have, and I will add them to the list. And I'm just going to start at the top. Sabrina, it looks like you win the prize for today, because I did a horrible job of promoting this. I totally forgot I was doing this today. What a great idea. Working on a tincture for mold support. Ooh, I'm going to write that one down. Man, I could talk about that all freaking day. But I'm going to go back to Sabrina's first one. So lemon balm and SSRIs. And so lemon balm, Melissa officinalis, lemon mint. It's not really lemon mint, but it really is lemon mint. SSRIs, and so SSRIs are your antidepressants, or one category of antidepressants. And it's funny. Are there real contraindications of SSRIs? Is there multiple? Whoa, what up, Spring? Long time no see. Man, it's Old Home Week here today. So there are not like hundreds of cases of people drinking lemon balm with antidepressants and having horrible reactions. But what's important to remember, somewhere I have recorded on YouTube for free my classes on herb-drug interactions. And one of the things I talk about that everyone is probably a little guilty of, I'm probably guilty of it, that if you're taking a medication for a particular issue, then you're like, ooh, I wonder what herbs are good for that too. And even if that medication is doing a good job at managing it, we go ahead and if you're taking an ibuprofen, you're like, oh, I hear turmeric's good for inflammation or pain, and then you start layering it on, and you're like, oh, and this is good for that too. And so here's the crazy thing. Herbs work. They do stuff, in case you didn't know. And if we see lemon balm, because that is used for depression, I find it better for depression than I do for anxiety, but it's touted for both. It's a little bit drying, a little bit moving. Dosage matters with lemon balm. So, and this always sounds weird, higher doses are better as an antiviral, and it is used as an antiviral. Topically, it's good for an antiviral, specifically for the herpes virus. And there's more than just genital and oral herpes. It's like the whole enchilada of herpes viruses, like Epstein-Barr. But in like those lower doses, like I would say under a rounded tablespoon, work better as that mental emotional health. And what we find is that it's better for things that people who are phlegmy, it's a little drying. And so people who are drying, so think either anemia or tending towards constipation, can't get enough water in them, dry skin, dry eyes, those people are more likely to have a side effect from lemon balm than somebody who's super phlegmy. But if we go on the assumption that herbs work and we layer it on top of an antidepressant, which works as well, now we're going to get a multiplying effect. Oh, I forgot you had asked me about that, and I think I never got to that last month or something. Y'all gonna make me work today. ALS, and MS, plant app. Oh my God, you got all the questions. Emotional. Where am I? Phone better hold out. I got a pile of stuff. Frustration. Tincture. So honestly, I love lemon balm because it's not I don't think of it as a heavy hitter. It's like, I see people put cautions on it. It's sedative. It's all of this. And I'm like, I haven't seen it. I find it's very safe during the day. Obviously, with the tincture, it depends on, if you tinctured fresh lemon balm, you might only have a 1-to-2 ratio, where if it was a dried lemon balm, I shouldn't even say that. If it's a name brand, it might be a 1-to-5 or something like that. Oh, good. So I would say, as a general rule, if you were doing 1-to-2 droppers 3 or 4 times a day, I would be shocked if that would cause an adverse reaction to the antidepressants, the SSRIs. That said, you might, if you were getting sedation, like you were getting tired from your SSRIs, and you throw in the lemon balm, it might make you a little bit more tired. So we don't always see the connection. We don't always see like, oh, SSRIs make me have these issues, because we see sexual side effects. We see depression. We see, depending on which one, there might be neuropathy, nerve pain. There might be suicidal tendencies. There might be brain zaps. There's all these weird, interesting things with the SSRIs and the SNRIs. And so we don't necessarily get those from those herbs that we say have those similar actions. But there is definitely a multiplying effect. So if somebody's not feeling the effects of their antidepressant, it doesn't mean that we should take 3 more herbs that are good for depression. We should see whether the dosage is right, whether the medication is right. And ultimately, if the medication isn't doing what it's supposed to, working with a doctor, tapering off of that, and then trying the herbs. Because with the herbs, sometimes we're a little bit more specific than just like, here's a handful of different antidepressants that, we're just going to run through them until one, hits the magic buzzer. And they're a little bit more precise than that, but not a whole lot. It's like whatever's popular this week. I will say with lemon balm, and opinions vary, I much prefer it fresh, whether it's fresh dried or fresh. It's very easy to grow up north. Less easy to grow it down here. You can, but it just doesn't thrive down here. I just think in this, some things I'm like, yeah, whatever, tincture. This is one where I really think it does better as a, I'm going to have to put my glasses on for my scribbly handwriting. It does better as the actual plant. And topically, for your herpes virus complex of viruses, I think those do, topically that needs to either be a really strong infusion, or it needs to be, I like just taking the herbs made wet and doing a poultice on top of whatever that affected area is. All right. Agrimony and autoimmune disorders. So it's always entertaining. I think agrimony is this great herb, and I never use it. And every time I'm like, I'm running through possible herbs when I'm making a formula, and I'm like, agrimony might fit here. And I was like, and I look at its indications and I run throughs. I was like, man, why don't I use this more often? And then I'll use it for a month, and then I totally forget to use it again. But that said, the agrimony is such an interesting plant. Depending on who you talk to, I want to say it's everything from a digestive to an alterative. Those are the biggest ones. And it has such a range of effects. And when you get it right, those effects are magical. It really can work well in formula or as a single. And it's one of those things where I have not seen issues with autoimmune disorders with it, except it's warmer in nature energetically. And, I at least for the folks who said howdy do on here, most of y'all know energetics. You've been a student at some point or another, or at least been to enough classes to hear me babble about energetics. And so most autoimmune disorders, not all, but most autoimmune disorders in flare-ups, and we see that with autoimmune, they're either in remission, where they're just like nothing weird's happening. Then you either get stressed out, or you eat the wrong food, or do the wrong thing, and all of a sudden that autoimmune disorder flares up. Those are frequently related to heat, and agrimony being a little warm. And so the concept of an alterative should normalize things, but I find the warm nature of it has the potential to not fit in a formula unless you counteract it with a bunch of other cold stuff. So as a single, I could see maybe it causes things to flare up a little bit. But it's not one of those, because I don't think of it as a strong nourishing herb. I don't think of it as a strong immune stimulant in any way, and I'm sure there's some research out there somewhere that says, oh, it increases the NF blah 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 blah, but I've not seen that cause flare up, but it's also not something I reach for autoimmune disorders. It doesn't mean it's not right. It's I would be more likely to use that when you're not in flare up, in which case it would not in and of itself, unless you had an allergy to it or a sensitivity to that plant, I would not expect that to cause any kind of a flare. And I'll generically say that a lot of herbalists, and I'm so guilty of this, we have one bad experience, especially earlier in our career. We have one bad experience with an herb, we now label that herb. And it's hard to get out of that rut. And I'll give you my favorite example, and I'll tell on myself. I always think of yellow dock as this pooping herb. Like, not that it's like colon blow, that it's this really powerful like purgative, but we use yellow dock. It's cooling, moistening, high in iron, and very inexpensive herb. And the first time I ever used that with a client, I gave him diarrhea. And I don't know why I gave him diarrhea. It could have been that they didn't need the iron. It could be they had a sensitivity to some of the alkaloids that are in there. It could be I didn't really understand energetics very well and it just kind of sucked. All of those are the possibilities. And so all of a sudden I have this fear of using this herb, because most people would say like, oh, it's a very gentle, nourishing laxative. It's great for anemia. We expect constipation with anemia. Like, all of those are normal. And so for the last 15, 20, probably 20 years, I've always steered away from yellow dock because of that once. And I think maybe it happened a second time. And I was teaching the class, it was like 2-3 years ago. I was teaching the class on what does our poop tell us at the American Herbalist Guild conference, and he's always so he's a hard ass like in private, but if you're teaching a class, unless you do something horrendous, he's going to be very polite. So he kind of sheepishly raises his hand and asked a question about yellow dock, and then he snagged me later on. He goes, Bob, I was like, I use yellow dock all the time. I harvest it, blah, blah, blah. He was like, I've never really seen that reaction. And I was like, and I totally told him myself exactly that. It was like the first time I used it, and I was kind of like gun shy about it. And so I think a lot of us, we don't always, if, we're standing up in front of class and, we wrote the book or whatever, I frequently disagree with books and so forth, whether it be the energetics or the actions or the cautions that people put out. But if nobody calls us on our crap, it's very easy for us to rely on our old experience that may have just been, we weren't very good back in the day. Not to say we were bad, but like, I like to think that I'm better today than I was 20, 25 years ago. And so the agrimony, autoimmune disorders, like, I'm sure some herbalist somewhere who wrote something said, ooh, I had somebody with a bad reaction, therefore I'm going to make everybody be cautious with this. And I would say every herb is a caution with every disorder and making sure that we get it right. Oh my God, how did 45 minutes go by? All right, agrimony, autoimmune, all right, I got those. Boy, and so I'm going to say, Tammy, you had a couple of interesting topical Chinese formulas, and Bingpen San, Golden Yellow, Jinhuang San, and Zidong Gao. And I'm going to guess you might be reading The Tooth in the Tiger's Mouth, but I won't swear to that. Those might be in our textbook, but you did put the page number. So I don't even know. Hey, Daniel. And so there's a couple of, we sometimes use these generically. The Bingpian, I would say, you have to use caution with. It is for, and I say that there's some of the herbs that are in there are in things like the evil bone water, which is a great liniment. It's topical, but some of the aromatic resins, and they're frequently not actually true tree resins. A lot of like the Bing Pian is frequently synthetic, and so you really have to investigate that on that one. Is strongly aromatic and it's certainly toxic internally, so you don't drink that. But there is some level of cumulative stuff. So we're like you're bathing in that because you've got all over arthritis pain, and it's used for pain, by the way. All of those formulas are kind of used for pain. But that one is particularly good for hot swollen, and swollen's the key point. It doesn't really matter the hot so much, but swollen. So we would look for pain that's associated with weather, in particular. The golden yellow, the what's his name? There's one company that makes the golden yellow, and it basically takes our huangs, the huangqian, huang lian, huang bai, da huang, and probably a couple of other herbs that I can't think of off the top of my head. And it's a little horrifying. There is a valid argument for it, but I would never do it. But it is made in Vaseline. If you read The Tooth in the Tiger's Mouth with Tom Bizzo, I think I said his last name right, it is our book on traumatology. It is a modern book from the 70s. So I guess that's modern for Chinese medicine. And he definitely uses things that I generally don't like petroleum jelly, Vaseline. He uses egg whites, which obviously interesting idea, but you can't exactly store that away. And for somebody who's vegan, they probably would not be okay with that. That one is particular. I actually use the golden yellow. I won't say I use the Bing Pian. The golden yellow I'll use for infections, and so it is an antimicrobial topical. The problem with it, though, is if you do it on an open wound, because of whatever the wetting agent, whether it's like you make it into a salve, whether you use the petroleum jelly, it's trapping the anaerobic bacteria and can potentiate making things worse. That said, the thing, neighbor kids, if you hear that screaming in the background, the golden yellow, I think we almost always have some on hand at the clinic, although I haven't used it lately. I love it for spider bites. And you could use it for any venomous stings and bites. I don't think I usually carry it around, but spider bites, people will come into the clinic who are like, I don't know if there's a brown recluse, but something bit me, and it's swollen, and the doctor's ignored me. And that's usually because if you get a brown recluse bite, my first stop would probably be the ER. If they turn you away, now you're in my realm now. You did the responsible thing. Brown recluse in particular is scary. It leaves holes in you and things like that. So I've treated a couple of spider bites, and I've also used it for boils that have not come to a head. And so I'll use the golden yellow as it's sold, and that is with petroleum jelly, which, yeah, sorry. But I'll put it on top. I'll also sometimes grind up fresh herbs, like I might grind up echinacea and add that in there. It actually does very well. I might add plantain, the plantago, not the banana. And then I'll put a thin layer, eighth of an inch. Sometimes I'll put a pad on top of it, sometimes not. But for spider bites, and I would say generically for venomous stings, and even for things like a boil that hasn't come to a head, I'll do moxibustion over it. It may be uncomfortable, and this is a weird one. Moxa is burning mugwort. It's kind of rolled up into a big cigar. It is energetically hot. It's using mugwort, which is energetically hot. and we're putting that on something that's energetically hot, a spider bite or a boil. It's red, swollen, pussy, and all that. And so it's a technique called sparrow pecking that I'll usually use, and it'll have a barrier of at least the golden yellow on there. And there's some research out there. There is a tradition of doing it, but there's research out there that I read about probably 10, 15 years ago, where they were finding that a number of everything from mosquito bites to spider bites and a few other venomous stings and so forth are deactivated by heat. And the moxa, the mugwort, when it's burned without actually putting the burn on you, creates a deeper penetration than if you were burning pine needles or tobacco or anything else. And there was some patent on it where they were selling this heating electronic device that was getting rid of mosquito bites. It's not that silly, but it was like an interesting idea. And so I do use that one pretty regularly whenever somebody comes up to me with venomous bites or stings. I don't treat a lot of boils, and I only use it on boils as a last resort. I don't use that as a like, oh, you got a boil, let's heat that up and make it burst, because what it does is it will cause it to burst. It's very painful to do, but it's probably preferable to lance it, but not everybody can get it lanced, at least not in a sterile environment like a walk-in clinic and things like that. So the Jin Huang San, very similar to the golden yellow. That can be done as a soak. It can be made as a liniment, but it is more infection oriented. Damp heat toxin in Chinese medicine. And then the Zidong Gao. And so Gao is a cool word, and who knows whether we've done that one in class. But a Gao is a salve in Chinese. And so anytime you see Gao, it's like you can buy Tiger Balm Gao, right? It's I don't even know what's in there, but it's this salve-like thing, and you rub it on and it feels good. So Gaos, there are many. I believe that one comes out in a cool purple color because of one of the chief herbs in there that I've actually given to people. It's a purple color, so the salve comes out kind of this really cool purple color. It's really nice, and it's used also for heat syndromes. So any kind of damp heat syndrome. Oh my God! All right. All right, I'm going to do my very quick, short station identification, just because the things that Spring put on here are going to keep me talking for a minute or two. If you're just joining us, feel free to type any questions that you might have. And if not, I got a crazy couple of things here that might actually take us all the way, but you never know. And if you don't know it, I'm Bob Linde. I'm an acupuncturist and an herbalist here in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida. Yeah, ask me in class this week and I'll show you the herb. It starts with a Z. I can't think of what the heck the name is. They were making purple lipstick out of it. Super cool. But I'm the owner of Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies, where you can find out more at acuherbals.com, and the Tradition School of Herbal Studies, where we have Western and Chinese herbal program. And so we have clinical practitioners that are in practice 6 days a week, and Monday through Saturday. Mist flower. All right, I got mist flower. And we've got student clinic 3 nights a week. Acupuncture interns from Dragon Rise's Acupuncture School practice under me there on Monday nights, and my Western senior students practice on Tuesday nights, and my Chinese herb students practice on Wednesday nights. So if you're looking to, you're not able to get into the senior practitioners, where price is different, but also experience is very different. Experience and training is very different. And with student clinic, you're going to have a couple students in the room, but it is a reduced rate. And so it's an opportunity for folks who can't afford it or not. Whoa, that was weird. It just made a weird sound. I don't know what the heck that was. Oh, awesome. Thank you. It's like, I've never heard that sound before, so I really appreciate that. So it's an opportunity, like if you're like, I don't really want to do a bunch of herbs, but you want to get a second opinion on your blood work and things like that. A lot of time folks just say like, hey, I got all these supplements. Somebody tell me whether they're right or not. There's definitely folks who come into student clinic for that. And I will say for most of the time, we actually save people money and get them on a better track, that we can make dietary recommendations, we can make supplement recommendations and things like that. So it's really a great opportunity. And we've got a ton of classes that are, we've got the two programs, the Western and the Chinese programs that are all the way from beginner, I don't know anything, all the way through practitioners. They're 2-year programs. But we've got so many cool classes that are standalone, just like, I think herbs are cool, I just want to take this one class, or I'm just interested in this subject. And I will say, check this school, or on Facebook. They're all posted on Facebook too. They're usually on Thursday and Friday nights, or the 2.5 hour classes on a variety of subjects, and always it's something interesting. Hopefully everything from Ayurvedic to growing to medicine making to specific subject matters, anatomy and physiology, Ayurvedic, Chinese, Western, it's all in there. And then the weekend, there's some, like this weekend's class on the business of herbalism is open to everybody, whether you're a student of mine or not. And other ones where you're like, yeah, I know we have some other ones that are open to the public. We just did the herbal animal care, but those most of them you have to be a student in the program to do them. Also, and I didn't mention this at the start, if you're like, herbs are cool, remember to check out the American Herbalist Guild. We have a local chapter here in the Tampa Bay area. And once a month they have a meeting and an activity somewhere in the Tampa Bay area. We did something down in Sarasota. They've got a camping trip coming up in December. And so it's cheap to free for AHG members. And if you're just like, well, I don't want to join anything, you don't have to. Sometimes there's a charge, sometimes there's not. Like they just did a cool class, I think it was last week, it's all a blur, on making herbal dream pillows. I think it was like, a whole $5. And everybody walked out of there with all their supplies and such for dream pillows, as well as the class about what is a dream pillow. And things like the camping trip, there's a fee for it, no matter what. If you don't know the American Herbalist Guild, please check that out. That is our professional organization for herbalists. Anybody can join. If you're actively enrolled in an herbal program somewhere, you can save a few bucks and join as a student. If you're just like, I think herbs are cool, you join as a general member. And then if you're like, I know herbs are cool, and you're a practitioner and want to go to get your professional membership, that's a process that is on the website for all of that I totally encourage herbalists to get that designation of RH, or registered herbalist. And they've got actually a newer level, and I'm embarrassed to say I haven't read about it, for those kind of aligned things that you're an herbalist, but you're not doing clinical practice. You might be a medicine maker, you might be a grower or harvester, or just some aligned profession. So they're really trying to do a little something for everybody. Unfortunately, our conference was just about 3 weeks ago, or I guess it's been 3 weeks, yeah. And that was in Black Mountain, which really got decimated, obviously, with Helene. And so we ended up doing it online. I expect that we're going to be back at that same location next year. And I'm excited about it because Black Mountain's a beautiful, beautiful place to do that kind of stuff. All right. I may not do these in the right order, Spring, so I'm going to do the easy one first. Plant apps suck. No, the plant apps are actually really good. I find that none of them are great. And what I always say, and I say this in class a lot, the plant apps are... Oh, that's right. Yeah, they're redoing the website. I forgot about that. The plant apps, and whether you do Picture This or the Google Lens, I liked PlantNet, none of them are that accurate. If you put it on an oak tree or a pine tree, they'll probably get that right. But when we're looking at things like mist flower, I might get to that. it may or may not get it right. It might get the genus right, but it may not get the species. And species, like in something like the mist flower and a couple of others, can really make the difference between toxic and not toxic. And so what I always say is the plant apps are great if you're okay with botany. And so, I forget where you were in the program, Spring, but, a little bit of botany goes a long way. I'm a big fan of Mark Williams. He has online classes as well as in-person classes on botany, and you can look him up, but Botany in a Day, there's a whole Botany Every Day. I really like that series. Not to say you can teach yourself, you can, but you have to be really dedicated. But taking local extensions, agricultural extensions frequently have botany classes. Local universities, you might pick up a 6-month program in botany, field botany in particular. But even if you just get those basic concepts of what's opposite, what's alternating, what are the flowers, what's compound leaves, that plus the plant apps, and honestly, then it doesn't really matter which one you use. You'll be able to more accurately identify your plants. Like I always say, it's like I'm a mediocre botanist, but I'm better than most of our students. Not all of them. Some of them kick ass. And so I find it very easy to use the plant apps to confirm or deny or give me my options, and then I can go and look at the nuance of a flower or a leaf shape that will get me to the right place with those. MS. I almost want to do these in red. Yeah, let's do MS. What the hell? Multiple sclerosis, autoimmune disorder that there are different types of MS. There's probably a half a dozen subtypes. And so I'll spare you all that. But just with like every autoimmune disorder, that can be times when it's not showing any signs and symptoms, and other times where it's literally crippling. There are two primary triggers for that always. One is stress, one is food. And whether it's MS or one of the other thousands of different autoimmune disorders, that should always be our starting point of managing stress. And the nature of an autoimmune disorder is it's stressful. So like, what a pain in the ass. But everything from really boring stuff like belly breathing or counseling or whatever level of exercise that you can do that's management, meditation, we have to allow for some version of stress management as a important part of the care plan for every autoimmune disease, but particularly so in MS. Food is frequently, I'm going to say, I won't say invariably, because I've definitely seen cases where I don't know, I never figured out what the food was. Food has a dramatic impact on MS in particular, and I would argue most autoimmune disorders. The easy ones are like gluten, corn, dairy. Sometimes it's nightshades. It could be latex. There's so many weird food sensitivities it could be. But always start with the most obvious ones, analyze the diet and say, all right, what's the stuff we're eating every day? Or like, man, you were doing really good and all of a sudden you got some crazy flare up that like crippled you for like a week. What were you eating in the 24 to 48 hours prior to that was outside of the norm? And so a lot of times you can figure it out. If you want to go all hardcore, FODMAP, by the way, and I just typed it in there because I just said funny words, is such a pain in the ass. I tried FODMAP briefly. I found it challenging to say the least. That said, it is very effective if you're able to do it. If for no other reason you suck it up for a month in order to figure out what your trigger foods are.
The problem with a lot of autoimmune disorders, if somebody is on the standard of care, Western medicine standard of care for that, they're using chemotherapy, immunosuppressants, steroids, which are a type of immunosuppressant, but sometimes those are really strong medications. And you at least have to be careful for herb-drug interactions in a case like this. And there's so many different ways that they can treat MS or any other autoimmune disorder. Because sometimes it's like every 6 weeks you get an infusion or an injection, in which case you've got a window, like stay away from really strong herbs like a couple of days on either side of that injection, and you can kind of figure out a safe way to go about that. If they're doing it daily or weekly, then it becomes more challenging. I'm going to say, just because there aren't enough hours in the day, at least watch the video on herb-drug interactions on YouTube. But the short answer is bitter and sour herbs tend to change the transit time of powerful herbs. And when we start to look at immunosuppressants and we start to look at chemotherapy, those are things that we don't want too much or not enough. And so the really bitter and the really sour herbs we need to stay away from with those medications they might be taking. Because steroids, prednisone being the most common, are a common adjunct therapies for flare-ups with MS in particular. Sometimes they keep them on a low dose of it, like long-term. Watching for, the standard is you start here at 20 milligrams and then you taper down over the space of a couple of weeks. AIP, yes. Yeah, just removing gluten. Yeah, it can be that easy. I have a number of MS patients. Yeah, Gray. It's like always start with the low-hanging fruit. Like gluten probably is pissing something off. But the prednisone is a tough one because they end up going on higher and higher dosages of prednisone or staying at that, 20 milligrams, which is a horrifying, you're probably keeping them at 5 and then cranking them back up to 40 or, I've seen like 80 milligrams of prednisone and then they taper back down. So a couple things happen, and this is across the board. Prednisone will spike your blood sugar, and so it's really important, anybody who is struggling with, and by the way, hey Greg, anybody who is struggling with blood sugar, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're diabetic. They could be walking that line where their A1C is like 5.7, that their fasting blood sugar is right at that 99 or 100. They take a strong round of prednisone, and it will literally throw them potentially into the hospital, into even diabetic comas and things like that. And so sometimes it's necessary to do prednisone, but in the same sense, there are very real side effects. I also find that folks with autoimmune disorders, they're on a roller coaster ride with the steroid, with the prednisone. And what'll happen is they'll get a flare up. The doctor has like a standing script with them, and here's your 40 milligrams of prednisone. And they're like, all right, and we're tapering down. We take a little bit less each day, and 2 weeks later or whatever, all of a sudden they hit that last dose of 5 milligrams, and then they're done. And what happens? They flare up. And so then they're back up on 40 milligrams. And blah, 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 blah. They take that last dose of 5 milligrams, boom, and they flare back up. And so this unrelenting mess. And you have to be super cautious, but licorice, from my Chinese students, that's gansao, will extend the life of the prednisone. And so it makes it extends the half-life of the prednisone. So the problem with licorice is licorice also can mess with your blood pressure, mess with kidney function, and increase the potassium levels in the body, which has issues. So being careful, working with a doctor, making sure blood work, blah, 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 is really important. in Chinese herbal medicine, I really like the formula. Oops. Oh, sorry, I spelt that backwards. I'm dyslexic in Chinese. Gansao Tong. We actually have a formula called Xiao Gansao Tong that's white peony and licorice formula. It's only those two herbs in there. I really like that for those folks who are on that roller coaster ride of prednisone. I find that very, very effective for more gently bringing them off so they don't get the flare up. As far as herbs go, and I wish I could say there was an like, here, just take this. Most people who are dealing with, and again, this is generic for autoimmune disorders as a whole, because sometimes their body's doing fine and they're in remission, and that could be for a day, a week, a month, it varies. And then all of a sudden something happens, stressor or food, causes them to flare up and they're like crippled up and all that. So that means we have two different states of being for these folks. And so energetically, and for those of you who know energetics, the idea of hot, cold, wet, dry, deficient, excess, tense, and lax, and then crazy Chinese words, all my Chinese students, y'all know what I'm talking about. So we need a formula for when they're doing well that is helping to normalize their immune system. And so we're being corrective, and that could be correcting the tissue damage that's happening, and that could be aiding their digestion, and that could be working on their immune system. So not immune stimulant, but an immune regulator. But then we need a separate formula for when they're in flare. And most people with autoimmune disorders can go, tomorrow's going to suck. And so they can start taking that second formula, which tends to be, most flare-ups are hot. A lot of times there's pain, so there's either chi or blood stagnation, that can be a tense condition, or stuck blood. There may be fevers with it, so we can actually use things that are fever reducers, or release the exterior, the diaphoretic herbs, things like yarrow and elder. Stay away from echinacea. There's questions about some herbs, but more than anything, we want like cold, drying herbs if there's hot, swollen stuff. We can also look at things that are more for symptom suppression. If there's muscle spasms, we might throw in something like, not pellitory, oh my god, starts with a P, and I totally can't think of it. It grows wild everywhere. We got a big old gallon of it made up fresh. Oh well. Somebody feel free to type that in the chat. Starts with a P, I can't think of. There's tendon contraction. It's good for muscle pain and spasm. It could be something as simple as kudzu, but that wasn't what I was thinking of. It could be something like kava. It can be, if it's more fascia, it could be gotu kola. If it's tendons and ligaments, we could be throwing in Solomon seal. No, not that. That's more of a digestive, although nothing wrong with that one. So any number of different things that we can... pedicularis! Good call! Yep, that was it, pedicularis. Particularly good for muscle pain and spasms, and is a good one to put in with some of those autoimmune things. But in that flare-up state, think clearing out heat and probably dampness, and look specifically like you almost want to see that person when they're doing good, but you also want to see what they look like when they're at their worst. And you may not be able to see them at both, like it's like, where are they at when you see them for your first appointment kind of thing. But you can certainly ask questions like, all right, this is what you look like when you're doing good, and we're talking about tongue and pulse and how you feel and what your digestion and your poop and all that kind of stuff is like. But then we're like, all right, tell me what it feels like when, you're in the worst flare ever. Do you get rashes? Do you get vision changes? Do you vomit? Do you constipation or diarrhea? All of those things will help us create a better formula. And obviously pain is, with MS and many other, pain and spasm is very common with MS. Again, depends on the type. So I wish I could say, oh, here's the MS herb. But really think two formulas rather than a single one. And I would say most people who are struggling with an autoimmune disorder, they know when they're going to have a flare-up. And so then they stop their formula that's designed to fix, and then they start in on the one that's like, all right, this is our herbal prednisone, if you will. And always keeping an eye at their, all right, I did that. Keeping an eye to whatever medications, because they frequently are on medications. We just have to be super cautious with that. All right, I'm going to do ALS last, because I'm keeping an eye on my time, and I'm not getting eaten too bad, so I may get away with this. So, boy, I can write some scribbly. The emotional liver. All right, so and this is true of a lot of systems, whether, if we're talking, as long as Gray's on here, if we're talking Ayurvedic medicine, we're talking our doshas, but they have relationships and subcategories of their doshas even. Chinese medicine, we talk about the 5 elements, and so we look at the Zangfu organ systems and their correspondences. So we see like heart, small intestine, spleen, stomach, lung, large intestine, kidney and the urinary bladder, liver, gallbladder, and I said heart, small intestine. Yeah. I feel like I missed one, but who knows? And with each one of those, not only do we talk about the actual physical organ, we talk about the meridians, the lines of energy where we put acupuncture points and so forth, but that might also be where pain shows up. But we put behaviors, we put body types, we put seasons with that, and of course emotions, and it goes so far to, like, if any of you get bored, put Chinese medicine 5 element correspondences, and you'll find laundry lists a mile long of the things that we correspond those things with. So the liver is the wood element, and liver, gallbladder, we see it controls the tendons. It is external opening is to the eyes. We say the liver or the wood is responsible for the free flow of qi. So it is the organ of regulation. Pitta, yeah. Most definitely, yeah. It's like, I always say it's like Jabba the Hutt is kapha, ho, 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 ho. And then we got Vata is off into the sky, and then Chitta is just, and that is that tense, contracted anger kind of thing. And so the liver in Chinese medicine tends to go from depression to irritability to anger. And if you've ever been in a class when I talk about this, I always love the original Pink Panther. We look at the bumbling Clouseau who irritates Chief Inspector Dreyfus throughout the entire movie. And if we watch the brilliance of Chief Inspector Dreyfus, forget Clouseau, but he goes from exasperated with him. He's just like, and we hear this. He literally sighs through the whole thing. And so that is his expression of depression or stuck. He's stuck with this detective. And then he gets irritated with him, and then you literally, about halfway through the movie, he's shouting, "Get out of here!" And then we watch it, and I always think every great actor literally studies Chinese medicine, because then you can see like the eye starts to twitch. I don't even know how you do that without it being real. And he turns red in the face and shouting at him, and in the next scene, he goes insane. He goes mad and tries to murder Clouseau. Again, that's obviously kind of the extreme, but I think it's a great expression of the transition that happens over time. And and I didn't say the liver also, we look at menses. So for women, we see menstruation and fertility is primarily controlled by the liver. And so the regulation of the cycle, it's supposed to be every 28 days, consistent, blah, blah, blah. It's supposed to switch ovaries each time. So like you know, if you have one ovary that's jacked up, you'll have like, oh, this cycle was really good. Then the next one is like, oh my God, I'm dying. And so that's literally the liver regulating it back and forth. When we see PMS for that depression, irritability, or anger, as one of my clients described it, irritable? No. Murderous. My staff runs scared. Like, that's that clues, that Chief Inspector Dreyfus scary liver thing going on. We see the liver meridian ends at the breast. So the breast tenderness, the fibrocystic breast that that happens with menstruation in particular, or PMS, that's all related to the liver being stuck. But it's always funny because how people manifest things like PMS, if they have it, and by the way, PMS you're not supposed to have. It's rare to not see it, but every once in a while people are like, nope, my cycle's perfect, which is amazing. It's like, I can't help you, you're too good. But we have some people who get really weepy and sad with their menses, and we relate that more to the heart and not the liver, in which case there's a longer version. I need a dry erase board to show you. But the liver releases the blood to the heart 3 days prior to the menses and forms the substances tiangui, or heavenly blood, and that's then the release of the menstrual blood, or the creation of a new life. And so in which case we don't treat the liver so much, we treat the heart, and how it manifests, we might choose different formulas and so forth. We also see that the liver, from that spiritual emotional aspect, the liver is your dream time, and that's the Hun, Hun, and there's a thought that a lot of mental illness, when we look at things like schizophrenia and things like that, when we see people hearing voices or seeing things that the rest of us don't see, that there is, the Shen, or the heart, is the spiritual heart, and that's our wake time, our consciousness, our ability to comprehend, our strength of being, and so forth. And the Hun, the liver, is the dream world. It's also our creative world and all of that. And for those folks who are seeing and hearing things, the thought is in one direction or another, but that Hun, that liver state, the nighttime, is leaking into the Shen state, and we see things that we should only be seeing and hearing in our dream world and not in our wake world. Easy for me to say that, doesn't mean I can cure schizophrenia or anything like that, but it definitely opens the door for helping things like mental emotional health kind of issues. In that liver gallbladder wood pairing, we also see decision making and courage. And so the Chinese, I apologize in advance, but if we look at Hispanic languaging, big cojones, right? And so they're like big testicles, and that's a expression of your courage or your manliness and so forth. The Chinese say you've got a good big gallbladder. And so that idea of courage, of self, and so people who are very timid, sometimes don't have, they need their gallbladder or their liver nourished. People who waver back and forth on decisions frequently either need their liver regulated or strengthened. And so that's the behavioral side of the liver. Tight tendons, we always say, ooh, the liver controls the tendons and ligaments. And so, forget touching your toes, you can't touch your knees when your liver's really stuck. But we say that livery people are inflexible, i.e. can't touch my knees, much less my toes, but they're also sometimes inflexible in their behaviors. Like, it's my way or the highway kind of thing, that we're stuck in a rut. We're not going, it's like the north going and the south going Zacks in Dr. Seuss. There's like not one step to the left, one step to the right. That rigidity of self. All of those can be liver-related kind of ideas, which liver is really a fun organ to explore from that spiritual, emotional, behavioral kind of standpoint. And the languaging that we use, changes in vision or something else that we see with the liver. And there isn't a single herb or anything. Oh, yeah, thank you. That's always a great one. Yeah, inner sight is definitely a part of that. So really you can go down some rabbit holes with all the spiritual energetic organs in Chinese medicine. But without a doubt, I focus in on the regulatory effects of the liver. And so it's not that you need to cleanse the liver. It's like sometimes we nourish the liver, sometimes we regulate the liver, sometimes we move the liver. Occasionally we have to drain the liver when there's a huge amount of heat and fire signs on the liver. We're just like, no, drain that sucker out. We got to get that heat out of you. You're going to explode. I find that if I focus in on the idea of things that are dysregulated, and your sleep can be dysregulated, your menses can be dysregulated, your hormones are the medical substances of regulation. And so we don't always associate the liver with hormonal balance, but if we look at its role in regulation, they correspond very easily. And so it's not like, a lot of times people try to say like, oh, testosterone is yang or hot and estrogen is cool or yin. I was like, yeah, not really, but sort of kind of. But ultimately those are hormones that have a multitude of functions and might have unique energetic properties, but they are all organs of regulation in some form or fashion, like luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormones, all of those, thyroid hormones certainly, are all things that regulate. So when we look at our emotions, depression, irritability, anger, we look at things that are dysregulated or waving back and forth. Those are all liver stuff. And one of my favorite things is look for sighing. And so that sighing, it quickly tunes you into the that idea of like something stuck, or sighing can also be you need to nourish the liver. I see a lot of harm actually caused. It's very popular to cleanse the liver these days, and I find the purging and cleansing in particular is hard on the physical liver, because those are usually toxic, purgative cold herbs. But for somebody who's deficient, the over draining, and oftentimes the herbs that we use for the liver are drying, actually aggravates things. The other thing is, if you're cleansing the liver, which I almost never will use that languaging, if you're not pooping and peeing, then you're just moving toxins from one place and putting them someplace else, and can actually make you really sick. So ensuring that your bowels are moving properly is important. And choosing the right herbs for the right imbalances with the liver are super important. All right, that's enough liver gibberish. Hopefully some of that was what you were looking for. Oh my God, it's so dark out here. My light out here doesn't work anymore. More hurricane damage I didn't know about. Oh, ALS. So ALS is fancy time talk for for Lou Gehrig's disease, it is a horrible disorder. There are, and just like all of these, there's different types of ALS even. Some are really fast, some are really slow. There are, because it's a muscle wasting disorder, it is, we associate it, and I'm sorry, for these, a lot of times I do fall back on my Chinesey stuff just because it's a little bit more precise, I think, than these are good for you. So focusing on the muscles, we associate that with the spleen and digestion. And the spleen in Chinese medicine, not your real spleen, but your freaky deaky Chinese energetic spleen, is also directly correlated to blood and with your immune system. It's your day-to-day energy, if you will, and specific for muscle strength, function, and growth. I'm going to say, all of the people I've seen with ALS, and it's not like hundreds, but I'm going to say more than a dozen, have a very deep depression that looks like somebody took a melon baller and scooped out in their digestion area of their tongue, the spleen. It progresses in odd ways, and it'll like stop or even get a little bit better and give you hope, and then it continues forward. I've seen cases where people are still, I won't say they're okay. They're probably, the one case I'm thinking of is actually my first case of ALS. He was in a wheelchair for, I want to say, 15 years. Whereas most cases of ALS, people pass within 1 to 2 years. Diet has an impact. There are approaches in acupuncture that I find helpful. There used to be a guy up in Palm Harbor who actually does PhD research on acupuncture and ALS. And when I found out what he was doing, I just referred people to him when they came in with ALS, and he would refer them to me for herbs because he wasn't an herbalist. And it was primarily utilizing scalp acupuncture. It wasn't solely that. And I will say, scalp acupuncture is a very unique subset of acupuncture. Like most, acupuncture, whether you're doing classical Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, it's meridians all over the body, and like we do lots of pokey points that are on the meridians. And then there's a couple of microsystems, like auricular therapy. The ear seeds are a type of microsystem. The scalp is a well-researched and microsystem that is a very specific type of needling and approach and mapping that I happen to suck at. I'm very familiar with it. I can do it sometimes, but generally the 2 times that people really should have scalp acupuncture, like you can use it for everything, just like the body acupuncture. And I'm like, I do it just fine with the body. If I feel like it, I'll do the scalp if I'm into it. But for the first year or 2 post-stroke, the scalp acupuncture is a superior approach. And for ALS, I think that it is a superior to find somebody who has done additional training past school, specifically in scalp acupuncture. And I have not. And my school sucked at teaching it. We didn't have a good teacher for it. And so it was something like we spent a week on, and then we never talked about it again. And like you memorized a chart. So I never felt very talented at it, and unfortunately didn't have enough practice in it because I didn't get enough stroke patients or ALS patients. From an herbal perspective, again, we see that focus on the digestion, the spleen, and there is let's see if I can spell it right. I'm going to type it in, and I'm not going to say this is the formula for ALS. That obviously I would be remiss in 1,000 different ways. Bu Wan Hua Huan Bu Tong Tong. I may have spelt this wrong. It's like 4/5 cure for something or another. The chief herb in this is both a Chinese and Western herb. Huang Qi, which is astragalus. Hopefully I spelled that right. Astragalus. There's like 50 grams. You can buy the Buyang Huan Hutong. You can buy it as a patent formula. For something as life-threatening, as scary as ALS, I probably would actually say, like, no, you're going to have to do this as granules. And it's not vegan. It has in there earthworms and some other weird stuff. The longest living one that I worked with for at least 15 years, and he was in a wheelchair and had a board to communicate and so forth, but 15 years and he was still very active. He'd come into the clinic every week, and his daughters would bring him. He was very functional, and literally, far as I know, he's still alive, because he ended up moving and seeing another practitioner that I referred him to, and I just kind of lost touch with him. But I know he was still kicking 15 years later. He was on his own research mostly, was doing a crap ton of supplements, a lot of amino acids, a lot of digestive enzymes. Trying to think of what else he did. Nothing too insane. There is some research to support serapeptase, but I would actually encourage, and I haven't researched this personally, but I probably spelt that wrong, lubricanase, but it is made from earthworms, and it is one of those herbs that we use for phlegm conditions and so forth. And now I'll throw a monkey wrench into this. People who served in the military, not even in like combat or anything else, people who served in the military have 7 times more likelihood to get ALS than the general population. And nobody's really sure why. It's an odd statistic. It's a scary statistic since I was in the military. And it's not sure, we can conjecture like all the toxic ass crap that's on military bases. When we look at the Marine base, then the male breast cancer rates are a gazillion times over everyone else. Camp Lejeune. I don't want to say all the toxic stuff that I worked with there, lead-based paints, and so forth. There were constant exposure of the depleted uranium, certainly if we're out there in combat kind of thing. Experimental medications, fun stuff. So without a doubt, that is an increased risk factor for stuff in general. But when we look at, military is a high stress environment, whether, combat arms, I was a dumb grunt infantry dude, but even the typewriter repairman is still doing the similar kinds of training, like they're going out qualifying with their weapons, and they're going out into the woods and playing cowboys and Indians, kind of crazy stuff. I think there, for a lot of Tabitha, a lot of the disorders that are uniquely high for military, it is transferred both to their spouses, which makes it really creepy, and to their offspring. And so, like some of the Desert Storm Syndrome stuff has been shown to be passed on, and not all of there's like subsets within that, and that would make sense then that there's an exposure on the bases, and certainly, like, I don't know of a military base that is not toxic as hell, and so the living quarters on and off base housing is frequently riddled with mold and other creepy stuff that I don't even want to know. So the reality, there is the possibility, and I'm going to switch to Western thought, like leave the Chinese behind for a second. that there may be a cumulative toxicity that's going on there, and there's an emotional toxicity because of stress, and that stress is transferred onto the family members. So depending on the units you're in and so forth, but like I can't imagine, I was infantry, so we deployed to stuff, whether it was training or Desert Storm. Every time there was an alert and their significant other packed up their bags, kissed them goodbye, and the family member frequently would not know if you were deploying for training or you were deploying to actually get deployed somewhere into a combat zone. And so certainly when it was a combat zone like Desert Storm or any of the, Afghanistan, any of those, they're deploying for a year. They might get one leave in that, so they might see their significant other in a year. They might be left pregnant or with a young child or whatever. And they don't know, A, will they get killed in combat? B, whether they're going to come back messed up, because a lot of people come back messed up. And so that is a trauma, just the fear of it, that is transferred onto all of the family members. And so whether that's a child in utero, sharing the mom's stressors of that and thoughts and fears, or the soldier themselves who are over there, they don't know whether they're coming back. They might, just walk out in the wrong place and the wrong time, and shit happens. So that's the emotional toxicity, if you will. So, but then obviously the exposure to chemicals and how that accumulates in the body. And that can be literally things like heavy metals and toxins and forever chemicals, but it can also be digestive turmoil and even potentially some of the stuff where, again, I will deny the word liver cleanse, but those things that are helpful for the liver, it can be that they need more B12 or methylated B12. There's so many different ways to think about it. And there is not a single approach that I've seen that is like, that's the way to go. But certainly, if we say stress and exposure to yucky things have one aspect of that must be a contributing factor, since we see that 7 times, and that's a high stress environment and very toxic environment. So are other people who get ALS, is there some toxicity in their life or high stressor or combination of those two that creates a susceptibility to turn on or off a gene that is relevant to ALS? And trying to identify that can be a helpful approach. At the very least, acupuncture, obviously, ensuring nutrient, because we see the digestive aspect of it, digestive support as best as possible, depending on where the ALS starts or transitions to, because like I had one that started in their foot and another one that started in their throat. So it's just like, who knows? And it's frequently not diagnosed until it's already starting to progress in a yucky way. But certainly if there's swallowing difficulty, eating the arms are paralyzed, then eating is challenging. So digestive support, peristalsis, the movement of the contraction of the intestines and stomach and throat, all of that, anything we can do to improve the digestive function, that might be hydrochloric acid, all of those can be really helpful. The sooner you can, so where does it start to make a difference in their prognosis? The sooner you can start, the better. Once somebody is like, they're on a ventilator, they're like 90% paralyzed, you might help with comfort. I've definitely had a few people who came to me, I was completely honest, I was like, I'm going to help, but I'm not going to cure you of ALS. And that's a horrible, like, I don't frequently say that, but it was like, I would be lying if I thought there was a great outcome from them coming every single day and giving me all their money. I was like, I could give them every supplement in the world. At some point, the scale's gone too far. But what I would say is, communication is frequently a challenge. I've had like 2 or 3 that were like having to write or had a word board of some sort. If they're in a wheelchair, the weirdness of somebody who had a normal life and then all of a sudden people stare at them funny, that treat them as if they are less than human, that treat them as if there's some, their mental capacity is changed. Their mental capacity is fine. Their just ability to express their thoughts is challenged. And so if we as herbalists, family members, whatever, and a lot of times as a practitioner, it's so much easier because we're like, no, we give a crap about our people, so we're emotionally involved. But the reality is we're not the family member who is caught in the same trap as the loved one. And so sometimes we are the voice of reason. We can ask the hard questions. And I've had really good conversations with people where they would come every week because they needed it for the emotional support and the stress associated with it. They just basic acupuncture, and the herbs made digestion easier, swallowing easier. So for all the time that they have left on the planet, we can make them more comfortable by doing digestive bitters, a B complex. And if you're doing acupuncture, or ear seeds, if you know the ear seeds and magnets, you could just do that. If it's a client or an acquaintance rather than a loved one, because it's so hard to provide care for a loved one, because you're not in a place emotionally as a loved one to provide the level of care that's necessary, because it becomes this nasty little cycle. I've seen this so many times. It's like the sick person doesn't want the other person to get sick or put themselves out or get stressed out, and so they're trying to push them away, or they're like, it's end of life and they're like become a little hyper controlling. Both of those can happen. And or they're like, I don't want you to have to wipe my ass and things like that. But then the loved one who's trying to caretake is like falling over themselves and trying to hide their own grief over the loss of the person they care about. And so there's this energetic, emotional shit show that those people are locked into, that they obviously are the primary caretakers, but they may not be the one who can provide the emotional comfort of just going like, you probably got a couple months left. Anything you want to say or do? Should we make a recording? And this detached thing. And I'll put the last little bit. I'll actually even get to Mistflower here. We'll finish this morbid subject up. There's a newer thing that I've really started to see a lot of. We've got a woman coming up, I think next month, and I'm embarrassed to say, because I'm not at the office, I forget her name off the top of my head, but I've run into a bunch of death doulas, and I am fascinated by the subject. Our society doesn't allow us to talk about death in any form or fashion. Like we have a funeral and we have a wake, or we just get drunk, or we do whatever it is that we do, but we pretend that life isn't terminal, and we don't have conversations until it hits us in the face. And it's unfortunate, because that means we all go through life unprepared for our grandparents or our parents or our loved ones. We're unprepared emotionally, physically, financially, wills and trusts. Like, we're frequently unprepared for shit happens. But I would say, especially that emotional, spiritual aspect of having those uncomfortable conversations, ideally not while you're, in your last days. But I think the more open we can be talking about the concepts of death and dying, I think the healthier the society as a whole would be, but certainly the individuals who are in there. All right. I think that's all I have to say about ALS. I think. All right. Somehow I got through all those. Mistflower. I don't have a lot to say about Mistflower, other than it's a really pretty flower. I have never used mist flower, other than to put in a vase. But I do not know of it being a medicinal herb. That said, I have seen a few people write about it. And it's easy, even though the flower color is the mist flower is kind of this light bluish color. It's quite stunning. But the flower shape is very similar to the tassel flower, or Cupid's shaving brush is the other name for it. I'm embarrassed, I can't think of the Latin name for either one of those. I've seen those mistaken for each other, even though I think, other than the shape, the color is so distinctly different. The Cupid shaving brush is toxic, and so it's not like you're going to eat it and fall over dead. But there is one species of that like grows in the Philippines, I think, that does have a history of food and medicine with water changes. But my understanding is that the ones that we have here in Florida are not edible. The authors. Oh, now you're going to ask me a hard question. Andy Firk and Green Dean are my two sources for that, but of course I don't trust anybody, and so I hate to say I googled it, and either one of them sent me a reference for it, or I found the references myself. But the mist flower, there may be some medicinal uses for it, but I would definitely start by making sure that it is safe to consume, and it raises the question. There's things that are food, like, how much spinach can you eat? Like, at some point, there's going to be a problem. We see people who juice 50 pounds of carrots every day and they turn orange. So, intoxicating in ingestion or intoxicating in because it's so pretty. And so there are definitely things that are food and like ginger. Ginger is both a food and a medicine. I'm sure there is a top end for ginger as well. So there's things that are like mostly food. There's things that are food and medicine. Okay, yes. No, they're lovely, without a doubt. And it's funny, there might be a flower essence. If there isn't, I bet you could create one. I don't know if you're familiar with flower essences or not. That would actually be kind of cool. Anything that has like that beautiful scent like that would be super neat. But then there's herbs that are only medicine and not food, and those can be toxic. So aconite is ingested. There are things like, poke, Phytolacta americana, are toxic, and yet medicine, and good medicine, but then it's like we need to know how to prepare it and what's the traditional use for it. There's usually dosage that is very precise, that if we exceed that dosage or the length of time that we take it, we start to run into problems. So mist flower, I want to say, may be in that medicine, and just because we find a reference, we ought to really all right, we found a traditional use for it, but that doesn't mean we should start noshing on it. But smelling it is always fine. I'm sure there's an exception to that too. But I would be really curious, and I won't say I've explored it a lot, but it would be I'm fascinated with flower essences. They're super cool. I don't use them often enough. But flower essences are homeopathic, but work on a spiritual, emotional, behavioral kind of realm. And there are the 54 basic Bach remedies that were created back in the 30s. But then people continue to add and make flower essences, and it's not very hard to do. It's actually quite simple to do. We do it at the school all the time because we have weird trees that bloom. We're like, we got to make a flower essence. But then the trick is we have to create the indications and use of it, and that's the part that takes practice. And when we look at a aromatic plant like that, even that idea of, you say it's intoxicating, and I mean, I don't think you're like silly drunk, but like there's probably a smile that comes to your face, or relaxation, the shoulders maybe coming out of your ears. And so like how do we tune into the subtleties of that, and why is it different from, say, a rose that people find intoxicating as well? And so I will say, if you don't know flower essences, explore that and see what you can see. Yeah, and enjoy smelling your mist flower. It's like, I know I've smelled it, and I was like, now I got to go find one and smell it. And yeah, great. There's so many plants that, yeah, let me know if you find out, like, and the trick always with a flower essence or any plant like that, come up with what you believe it to be, then don't tell anybody. Find somebody who's also kind of sensitive to that stuff and say, hey, try this, tell me what you think. And oh, perfect. I never remember who's taken what. No, that's awesome. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. But then always find like one or two other people to see what they come up with, and then see if there's some overlap, because then you can really feel secure in saying this flower essence does that. And it's challenging to do that. You can do that with physical plants, not just the homeopathic plants like that, and see what they come up as. But yeah, great. It's one of those things, like there's so many, like, and things that we think of very commonly are regular vegetables we buy at Publix sometimes have to be processed, and we lose that knowledge and tradition. And so a lot of times when we look at people who are coming from outside the country, they know how to process things like a taro root, that we might go, ooh, I heard taro was good, and we start noshing on it like a raw piece of potato, and you're going to be awfully sick because of the calcium oxalates in there. And so the idea that it has to be processed, and so many foods and herbs need to be processed to be safe. In water changes, heat, all of those things really play into it. All right, the end of our evening is here. So if you're joining us for the first time, I'm Bob Linde from Acupuncture Herbal Therapies and the Tradition School of Herbal Studies. I've got the last 3, 4, God knows how many years of this Herbal Open Forum archived on YouTube. I will add this one to YouTube if you... Oh, shit, we didn't even get to that. Herbs for mold, aromatics, things that have berberine. I like a mix of vinegar and alcohol, but use the white vinegar, not the apple cider. And ask me later, because that's an interesting subject. I don't have any 2-second answers for that. Crap. Yeah, that's a tough one. Sorry, that was written on there, but we're out of time, and I got to finish for class. So check us out, and I have no idea what next month's theme will be, but I will try to post a theme somewhere. And I hope I see you in a class sometime soon. Bye. All right, how do I turn this thing off? There we go.